So hello everyone, and welcome to today's Ohio Aerospace Institute and SAE International Aerospace Quality webinar. We're looking forward to a excellent slate of presenters here today, so let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Becky Lemon. I'm the Industry Program Manager in Aerospace Standards at SAE International, and I welcome all of today's participants and thank you for joining us today. And I would also like to introduce Kim Halizna. Kim.
Good morning. Thank you, Becky. I'm Kim Halizna. I'm the Director of Global Development and Programs here at OAI, and we are very pleased to be working with SAE International. We've entered into an MOU with them because we realize that programming and standards are very important to companies who are wishing to further their aerospace and defense opportunities. So we plan to offer a number of these. In next year, we plan to offer some more in-depth, in-person, 1-2 day trainings on various topics. So please reach out to me if there's other things that you would like to learn about or know about. Our focus here is on research and technology development, education and training, as well as collaboration on technology-based economic development at a global level. So it's very important that companies are versed and are able to comply and meet the standard needs. So thank you very much. And thank you to all the presenters, and we look forward to working with you.
Thanks, Kim. So we have a busy webinar today. We are recording the session and we will provide a link to the video after today's webinar. If you have questions throughout the course of the webinar, feel free to type those into the chat function. And we have 2 question and answer sessions scheduled today. So we will work to get through everyone's questions as best we can. So I'm going to review today's agenda. We have, again, the welcome and introduction from Kim Halizna from the Ohio Aerospace Institute and myself, Becky Lemon from SAE International. We're going to have an overview of SAE International's Aerospace Standards Program from Jonathan Archer, the Director of Aerospace Standards Strategy and Innovation in Aerospace Standards at SAE International. I will provide an overview of SAE's Aerospace Quality Standards activities, and then we will have Alan Daniels from Regulatory and Quality Systems Oversight from Boeing Commercial Airplanes will speak to us about the AS13100 series of aerospace quality standards. And I do hear a little bit of background noise. If everyone could make sure they're on mute, please. Following Alan will be Tim Lee, the Manager of Supplier Quality at Boeing Commercial Airplanes. Tim is going to talk to us about the IAQG, ICOP, OASIS, and Certification Overview. Then we will do a 10-minute question and answer session followed by a 10-minute break. And then right after the break, we have Aaron Troshnetz, General Manager of North America Quality Assessments with Smithers. And Aaron is going to talk to us about the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC is the acronym. Following Aaron will be Larry Bennett, Consulting Engineer for Global Sourcing Quality at GE Aviation. And Larry is going to talk about the AESQ and the new standard that came out this year, AS13100. After that, we have Ethan Akins, Senior Business Development Manager in Aerospace with the Performance Review Institute. And Ethan is going to provide an overview of the Nadcap program. Then we have Tim Davison from our corporate sales group at SAE International. Tim's going to do a quick overview of SAE's Mobilis database and our OnQ digital standards system. I will also provide a brief overview of SAE's Aerospace Quality Training, followed by some information on how to get involved with SAE's Aerospace Standards program. And then we'll do another 10-minute question and answer session there towards the end, followed by some wrap-up. So we have a very busy schedule today, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Archer, Director of Aerospace Standards, Strategy, and Innovation at SAE International. Jonathan is going to provide an overview of the SAE Aerospace Standards Program. So welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Becky, and welcome all. Next slide, please. So who's SAE International? Well, we're a group that's focused on advancing mobility knowledge and looking at solutions to benefit broader humanity. We aim and we are leaders in connecting educational mobility professionals to look at clean, safe, and accessible mobility solutions. The graphics on the right-hand side basically provide a broad scope of how we've been summarizing our initiatives been undertaking this year and following years to provide broader mobility to community by providing forums that are neutral, to be able to convene industry specialists to build consensus standards, to enrich and access the information necessary to move forward and advance industry in, as I say, in the broad areas that have been outlined. We've outlined 10, looking at advanced manufacturing and materials, advanced production and propulsion systems, blockchain, the management data, providing connectivity, linking that data across mobility solutions. The very broad discussion of electrification of transportation, particularly from an aerospace perspective, with UAS and advanced air mobility solutions. Considering where data and messaging and connectivity, both cybersecurity in the software and physical domains, looking at automation and automated systems for both manned and unmanned systems and ground vehicles, but also broader workforce development. If we haven't got the right people with the right skills, then we can't execute any of these technologies and innovation into transportation products. Next slide, please. So where have we come from? Who has built SAE into the institution we are today? Obviously, the aviation pioneers you see in front of you, starting with Orville Wright, who's seminal in powered flight. He was instrumental in persuading the Automobile Association, as we were, to become the aeronautical and automotive focused institute we are today. It was actually Elmer Sperry in 1916 who coined the phrase automotive, recognizing that automobiles and aviation are motive. And so in 1917, we became the automotive engineers, incorporating both automobiles and aeronautical engineering. Next slide, please. So with the Wright brothers backing and the SAE now incorporating aviation, they continue to support the values of the organization with open letters to encourage organizations that they worked with and the broader community to get involved. And what you can see on the screen is one of those letters from 1918, praising the value and the need for industry to get involved and become members of SAE. Next slide. So what did that mean? Well, that meant that the first aviation standard was a spark plug in January of 1917. At the time, aircraft were all powered by rotating and normally aspirated engines, and the specialists and practitioners from the US, Great Britain, and France came together, and this is what was produced. And fundamentally, this is the genesis of what we do today. This is in our DNA, and this comes, as I say, from 1917. Next slide, please. So since the first spark plug, we've now got this eye chart. Over 180 technical committees split into 10 systems groups, producing 4 main types of standards: aerospace standards, material standards, best practices, and information leaflets. And they're all generated by consensus, by industry coming together to develop this material as a community, to inform the community, and also teach through a network of specialists, sharing their knowledge and documenting it in the materials we produce and share today. Next slide. So from a look back of 2021 has slightly been different, but fundamentally, on average, we have 125 meetings worldwide, face-to-face meetings worldwide. You know, over 2,500 virtual meetings held in 2020. That boils down to over 8,000 individual committee meetings, supporting obviously the 180 technical committees, which produce in the current marketplace over nearly 8,000 standards. In the last couple of years, on average, we've published 650 standards, with over 1,300 currently in work. And each standard takes about 18 months to go from inception to publication, which is a tremendous effort, given the diversity of topics that are covered. Next slide, please. So the need for a standard is stimulated by industry. It's not stimulated by SAE directly. We bring the necessary expertise together. As I say, in consensus, it's an open body. They develop the material to a scope. It's then passed through to our governance body, the Aerospace Council, to provide oversight to ensure that those standards are to a requisite publication standards and reflect the technical need, and then they're published and appear in our marketplace through some of the tools that you will be talked through, Mobilus and OneQ, that will be explained a bit later. Next slide. So how do standards fit into the engineering world? Whereabouts how are they used? So fundamentally, the broad management of international aviation is by ICAO, which is the United Nations group. They provide an international structure by which aviation authorities provide regulation in each of those countries. So from a design, manufacturing, and key maintenance organization, you have FAA, EASA, Transport Canada, and ANAC of Brazil. They provide the fundamental national authorities that formulate regulation, develop policy, and provide the broad guidance and means of compliance that our standards are used to show compliance with. So from an EASA perspective, they reference over 150 of our standards, FAA over 400, and we generally get about 20 or so tasking requests from those authorities to develop standards or update standards to reflect change in technology or new innovation. But we also support those not just from here in Warrendale, Pennsylvania, but also from Washington, D.C., We have offices in London and Amsterdam, but we also have offices in Shanghai and China to provide that full international engagement to make sure that standards are harmonized and are accepted around the world. Next slide, please. Not only do we have relationships with the civil community represented by EASA, FAA, and so forth, but we also have relationships with defense partners as well. The US DoD first engaged with SAE to develop standards during the First World War, so 1915, 1919, to build a truck, the Liberty truck. But since then, we have worked with both DoD here in the US and in the UK to adopt, nearly 3,500 standards into converting them from military standards into a civil product that are then used by civil contractors to support the DoD. One area that we're working very stridently to support is revitalization of standards within systems engineering. We've recently translated the configuration management standard into EIA 649 and also AS 6500, which is a manufacturing management program in 2015. But these efforts are ongoing, well supported. Obviously, an area that's of vast interest to everybody is counterfeit components. And there's been two seminal documents, AS 5553B, the counterfeit electronic and electromechanical parts, avoidance, detection, mitigation, and disposal document, but also ARP 6328, guideline for development of counterfeit electronic parts, avoidance, detection, mitigation, and disposal, to ensure that the supply chain from parts through into use is secured with appropriate parts, and has subsequently been adopted by the DoD and in the UK. Next slide. So who's involved? There are currently, I think, 31 organizations and companies that form our Aerospace Council, providing oversight and governance of our processes and the publication of documents. They represent major airframers, other associations, authorities, part suppliers, but also research organizations and universities. In 2019, COMAC joined and took a seat at the Aerotech conference in Bordeaux. But as I say, it's a very broad group representing both North America, Europe, Asia, and South America, all the key areas where aircraft are designed and manufactured. Furthermore, ICAO, the international body regulating international aviation, has an observer role. So not only are we looking locally, but we're also looking internationally and providing that broader oversight for future international harmonized regulation. Next slide, please. And these are some of the committees that have been convened to take up that new technology in the last 5 years. Particularly G35, the modeling, simulation, and training on the bottom right. That's our newest committee, looking at new approaches to training aids and training mechanisms. But it includes a very broad range from lithium battery packing for air transportation, cabin air quality, UAS operator approvals, the electrified propulsion, artificial intelligence, engine corrosion. As I say, it's a very vast and differing levels of of industry engagement to produce standards consumed by industry and the authorities. So next slide, please. So from Ohio's perspective, your aviation engagement is significant from a state perspective, with over 1,332 participants across all of our committees. That's an uptick of 42 people. Unique participation from an individual perspective is nearly 600. Voting members, 289, so that's an increase of 5. And committees that are chaired by members from IO is 12. Obviously, the change in the number and composition of chair, vice chair, and secretary is revised and renewed every 2 years. So hence those numbers go up and down. But currently, the member that supports the Aerospace Council is GE Aviation. So obviously a significant contributor, not only to Ohio, but to the council. Next slide, please. And this is a summary of those committees that provide leadership from Ohio. As you can see, it's a very diverse and very strong technology focus with additive manufacturing, polymeric materials, in-flight propulsion measurement techniques, and fundamentally aerospace engine supplier quality, which is G22, which is key focus of this webinar. Next slide, please. And obviously, these are the organizations that provide that engagement, both from DoD, from associations like America Makes, through to Collins, Crane Aerospace, GE, Honeywell, the list goes on. But all provide significant input, both from the industry directly, but then also from the government and from the universities. So it's a very diverse and welcome participation. Next slide, please. And finally, what it is we produce. As I say, we produce aerospace standards, ASs, edge reports, which are research based. We do both in-person conferences, but also digital content to support those meetings. And as I say, you'll get briefed on Mobilus and 1Q a little later. So next slide. And finally, although the committees and steering groups and advisory groups are very diverse, we're fitting them together to show that from a transportation perspective, many of these things are interconnected. Batteries appear in cars, in trucks, in aviation, in new air mobility vehicles that are coming online. Those electrical systems, as the world becomes more electrified, spread across those things. Crashworthiness, again, affects everybody. Autonomy is reaching more deeply into cars, trucks, commercial vehicles, more deeply embedded within aviation. So that hence needs cybersecurity. But all of those things require manufacturing and maintenance, and they come together with, as I say, the materials and manufacturing processes and parts. So it's a broad ecosystem that interconnects and interrelates, and SAE is making that more of a visible link to improve efficiency in the way we use standards, but also making sure they're produced for a wider community. So next slide. This is looking at a specific area where of high relevance is additive manufacturing. It's a significant piece of work that spans, I think, 35 committees in over 500 members. It engages a very broad and international group looking at metals and non-metals, and they've developed to date about 25 documents with a further 35 in work. So next slide. And this is just a sample of those materials and processes that are currently being developed by the team. It's very relevant from an Ohio perspective because a lot of organizations are engaged, GE being one of the pioneers in additive manufacturing and a key stakeholder in producing these documents. So next slide, and I think that's the final one. So hopefully you've seen something of relevance. Becky will talk to you how to better get engaged, but please do. We can't do this without you. And if there are further opportunities that we can offer to partnership with any particular organization to better enhance the work that we do, then either contact me directly or Becky. But thank you, appreciate your listening and your participation in this webinar. And if you have any questions, we'll be able to talk you through those a little later. Thank you. Becky?
So thank you, Jonathan, for that overview of the SAE Aerospace Standards Program. If you have any questions again for Jonathan, you can either type them into the chat box or contact Jonathan directly. Our next presentation is from myself. I'm going to do a brief overview of SAE's Aerospace Quality Standards activities for this group. So we'll start out with the interconnectivity of our aerospace standards. When it comes to aerospace quality, we have the G14 committee, which focuses very specifically on aerospace quality, but there's a lot of interconnectivity between all of the SAE committees when it comes to manufacturing management, which is the G23 committee. We have G22, which does aerospace engine supply chain quality. We have counterfeit avoidance and cybersecurity. We have several committees that address those topics that overlap with quality. We have avionics process, component management, safety, design, assurance, autonomy, and AI that all have varying degrees of overlap with aerospace quality. So these committees have a lot of interconnectivity, and we keep them connected to keep the information flowing. But for today's webinar, we're going to focus very specifically on G14, which is the America's Aerospace Quality Standards Committee, and the organization that it partners with, which is the International Aerospace Quality Group, and also G22, the Aerospace Engine Supplier Quality Committee. So we'll get into some more details on those in a minute. But as far as the AS9100 series of quality standards, again, SAE partners with the International Aerospace Quality Group, or IAQG. And we do this through the G14 committee at this time to develop and publish this series of standards. And Alan Daniels coming up is going to do a much deeper dive on the AS9100 series for us. And then we also published the AS13100, which is a new standard that just came out this year, but that focuses on aerospace engine supplier quality. And there's a series of standards published by the G22 committee. That committee also works with an organization called the AESQ Strategy Group. The committee writes the standard, but the strategy group does the communications and the deployment and the training that's all related to the standard. But today we'll focus on this more on the standard itself and give you a short overview of the AESQ. And Larry Bennett from GE Aviation is going to give us that. So that was a very brief overview of our quality standards activities. We have several presentations coming up that will do much deeper dives for us. But if you have any questions, my email address is on the screen, so feel free to reach out to me or enter your questions into the chat box. So now I would like to welcome Alan Daniels, Regulatory and Quality Systems Oversight with the Boeing Company. Alan is going to provide an overview on the AS9100 series of aerospace quality standards. So welcome, Alan.
Oh, thank you, Becky. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about our aerospace standards for quality management system. So if you go to the next slide. I'm just going to dive right into it and talk about myself. Yeah, I do work for the Boeing Company, as Becky mentioned, and I have several roles within the International Aerospace Quality Group, which I'll talk a little bit about, what their role is and how they try to lead the industry as far as integration and commonality. But you can see here what we're going to go through is the history. Talk about our standards. So we have more than one. We have several. Not as many as additive manufacturing, I might add, but 50 plus going on. Wow, that's a lot of standards. And you can see here we have some activity that's going on. We're working towards a revision for our AS9100 Quality Management System standard. I'll talk a little bit about that, a preview, which not many people have had yet, as to what we're working on and what we're doing. And then some of the support material that we currently have, because we don't just produce standards, we actually give people ways to use those and be successful in their use. So if you go to the next slide. The history began clear back in about 1995, and I'm not going to go through all this in detail, but it actually started as a Boeing document. That's one reason that we stay very, very closely involved. And it was based on ISO 9001, the 1994 version. And then, of course, it progressed from there. We actually started as an ISO committee when it started to go international. And we found that that wasn't very user-friendly for the international community for industry because of their voting structure is really by country, not by company or voting member. So decided to go with SAE and set up that structure. And of course, now we have actually a really nice international industry-controlled standard that we're quite happy with. We also found that technical reports were not suitable for the ISO rules, were really problematic, and we just couldn't live with that. And we have that freedom, of course, a little bit under SAE. And we transitioned in 1999, and we've been publishing ever since. So we're on Rev D of the AS9100. So go to the next slide. Our mission really is to achieve that commonality, make sure that the entire industry is working towards one quality management system standard, and of course, flow that down to all of our suppliers. And that's really been the goal all along. And the intent here, of course, is to improve quality, cost, and on-time delivery of all of our products, which can be problematic, and it does help to have that commonality. And you don't have all your primes or your OEMs going to all the different suppliers with different requirements, and it drives up cost and complexity and chances for error. We have products. You don't think of standards as being products, but they are. We develop them, we get them published, so there's an end result, there's an end product. So we have 27 of those today, and we have some others that we're looking at working on. We control those through the ICOP, which is a closed loop system, and Tim Lee is going to talk more about that after me, which makes us a little unique as far as, and especially in comparison to ISO 9001 and their certification scheme that they have. So it works very well, and he'll talk about some of the benefits associated with that. And of course, this is managed through our OASIS database, and we develop best practices, and we have the supply chain management handbook. We provide guidance material when we publish our standards, and now we're venturing into partnerships with training and trying to work into that mode a little bit, actually gleaning some of the experience and best practices from the engines group, the AESQ. We have over 200 participating companies, 69 voting members currently, and 27 members of the IAQG Council itself. So if you go to the next slide. And very simply, everything that I just said is kind of encompassed right here. We have 3 sectors: the Americas, Europe, Asia Pacific, and various voting members for each. We try to balance them out as much as possible. And of course, they're all responsible for deployment of those IAQG initiatives and standards within their sectors. Next. Now a little bit about the standards themselves. You can go to the next slide. This structure really applies to pretty much how we develop standards throughout SAE, but this is particular for the IAQG, but we of course start with planning. We have initiative processes, how to start a project, our operating procedures. And of course, we go into our writing committees, we develop the standards themselves, and then you have your governance, your balloting, your voting, making sure that these standards are well vetted, well understood, and accepted throughout the whole industry. And then, of course, publication, people can actually use those standards. It's a very simplified version, but this is how the overall process works. So if you have your SIPOC, for those that like that, you have your inputs, of course, and then your tasks associated with the process itself of developing. And then, of course, your output would be the publication to the marketplace and the users. So next. This complicated chart really does a great job of explaining everything that we have within the IAQG as far as standards goes, and who controls those and what they do. So you can see in the dark blue, we have our certification standards. And of course, that's we call it the 9100 series. The 9100 is your general QMS. Then we have maintenance, 9110, and distributors, 9120. The auditing scheme for that is the 9101. And that's just for the certification standards themselves. And then, of course, we have the certification oversight, and Tim will talk more about that, and that's our 9104 series. And this is really where the overall requirements, the certification standards comes into play. And you can see the certification support standards. These are kind of the middle ground. They're not just support standards. They actually are linked to or utilize or baseline into the 9100 series. And then, of course, we have standards that actually support the implementation of the certification standards, and you can see those down below. And then, of course, that's supported by our supply chain management handbook. And these are really encompass all the products that we have today. Is that certification scheme, that the standards themselves, and of course that support material, the supply chain management handbook. And the fourth one here in the future, we hope it will be training. Next. I mentioned that AS9100 series has a baseline of ISO 9001. We use it in its entirety. Some of the other sectors, and sectors in this case I'm talking about like automotive or medical devices or telecommunications, they used to have ISO 9001 as their baseline, but because of various reasons they've stopped doing that. They might go back to it in the future. They still reference it, but we actually still have it in our document in whole, and it's the baseline. And then we add our aviation, space, and defense requirements to that. And you can see over on the left-hand side what those are. These are a snapshot. It's not all of them. But because we have complex products, complex industry, we want a little bit more control. It's highly regulated industry, so we need these things to make sure that we perform to the level of our customers' needs and regulatory needs. If you go to the next slide. Now, a little specifics on the AS9100. Go to the next slide. Not going to go into a lot of detail. This gives you an idea of the differences between AS9100. This is our series, by the way. AS9100, which is the general quality management system, as I mentioned, 9110 maintenance, 9120 distributors. and the differences between the two. This isn't all the differences, but you can see here, actually in the last revision, we incorporated some of 9110 into 9100 and added product safety, because this has been a big area that we're been getting a lot of attention, both regulatory and by the customer. And of course, obviously, it's the right thing to do. A lot of people said, well, safety doesn't really belong in the quality management system, but we wanted to create a bridge to, say, documents like for SMS and various other things like that, and also create a little bit better bridge to our aviation, space, and defense requirement 9110 for maintenance. As you can see, for the distributors, their products, of course, are a little unique. They don't usually develop anything or make anything. They're kind of a pass-through, and so their needs are a little bit different. And you can see here that, you know, focus on counterfeit parts and various other things like that, raw material validation are really things that are a high focus in the distributor world versus the quality management system itself in general. And once again, it's industry controlled. It strengthens our compliance and collective supply chain. And this is our trio that we utilize today. We go to the next slide. The 9100 team, I am the leader of this team for the IAQG, and then I have my sector leaders, which is for the Americas, Buddy Crescioni. Thierry Kutlin is out of what had worked for Airbus. Now he's a contract employee. He retired from Airbus just recently. And then June, he's actually our aviation, space, and defense, Nishiguchi. And of course, we have other representation associated with that from the various sectors. We try to balance it. And then we actually add in, this is why we call it a series team, the 9101, leader of that team, 9110 for maintenance, the leader of that team, 9115, which is our software. Software is a product, and these documents tell you how to apply that as a product. And then some of our other activities, and of course 9120, which is our distributors. So all these people make up our 9100 series team. You go to the next slide. And of course, the premise of both the ISO and the AS9100 is the quality management system principles. You'll see these built into the entire quality management system, the 9100. This is really the foundation, and we make sure that we tick all of these boxes in the development of the standard. Some of them are clauses or series of requirements themselves, and they follow a very distinct plan, do, check, act scheme here. And as the planning is really a huge piece if you really look at it. You know, you have clause 4, 5, 6, and 7, and all those things related to that. You know, that's before you even start building a product. So planning is very important to make sure that your output is what you wanted to achieve. Your do is really your value stream. Even though it's one line, it's massive. This is really the heart and soul of any organization. But you do that planning up front to make that piece successful. And then you check it, you monitor it, you make sure that everything is healthy, you audit, and then, of course, you improve, which is act. Next. So if you envision like a three-legged stool, that's really what the quality management system is all about these days. It has been actually for quite a while, except we added risk-based thinking, the process approach being one leg, risk-based thinking being the other. Process approach, of course, is how you put together, it's the structure, it's the foundation of the entire quality management system. Plan, do, check, act is how you manage that. And then, of course, risk-based thinking is how you go about improving that. Go to the next slide. A little preview on our 5-year review. Every 5 years, we have a a review to make sure that the standard is still relevant. And I'll give you an idea of where we're at currently. Go to the next slide. So we did a survey. You don't have to do a survey in our 5-year review anyway, but we did. And this is just the overall participation. As you can see, a little disappointed in the Americas here, but got some really good input from Asia Pacific and the Europeans. Go to the next slide. And then, of course, comments by sector. You can see Asia Pacific gave the bulk of our comments, and we got some very good feedback. We didn't just go to the sectors. We actually went to some of our, we'll call them stakeholders in this particular case, but interested parties and some of the groups within the IAQG, and asked for their feedback. We actually had a unique approach to this particular survey. In the past, it's always been basically to collect as much information as you possibly can. This time, we actually went to each individual voting member and said, give us your top 3. And your top 3 things that you would like to see revised, your top 3 things you would like to see added. And then we have some future concepts that we asked them to look at and give us the top 5 there. So it was trying to focus in on what's really important to the industry. We go to the next slide. So this was a different approach, very unique actually, in some cases. So these are the top 5 areas of interest that came up. One is we have a standard on APQP, which is Advanced Product Quality Planning, and it came out a couple of years ago and has been doing quite well. And this is just for better linkages. So there's a lot of interest in that, making sure that there are linkages there today, believe it or not. But the 9145, our APQP standard, wasn't published at the time that we did our last revision. It was still in work. So we put some thinking ahead. We put some things in there that did link, but they're not, they're more implicit, not explicit as far as the linkages go. Visual inspection, remote auditing. Obviously, the current environment, you can imagine why that came up as an area of interest. Not a lot you can do in a quality management system associated with this. You can reference it. You maybe put it in internal audit or, some sort of reference towards that and how you might go about doing that. Economics of quality. This is an issue, and I do say issue for a reason, because a lot of the CEOs, if you look at a lot of various surveys, a lot of feedback that we get, people aren't seeing the value out of their quality management system that they would like. It's not reducing, say, defects. It's not, and then a lot of that's because they're not using the quality management system the way that they're supposed to, but still, that's perception, and that's something that we need to be cognizant of. Product and service safety. Once again, I mentioned SMS. We added product safety in the last revision, just a couple requirements, very, very high level, but better linkages to that, because we have some new regulatory requirements coming up that are going to be very important there to make sure that we have those linkages. And human factors. And I think also because of COVID and various other things, this is the reason that floated to the top. If you could click it one more time, there's one other. That was the top 5, but we might have 6, because if you actually add up data quality, data security, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, all software related or data related, that would be your top item. So obviously, this is an area that we have to be concerned with, and we'll take a look and see how we currently address some of this in the standard, but we'll probably have to go into a little bit more depth. This gives you a really good idea as to some of the new concepts that might evolve going into the next revision. Next. And I underlined might. So I don't want you going off and telling everybody, oh, this is what they're going to be putting into the next standard. These are all just a lot of different things are being looked at. And with that, we have our guidelines, and this is why kind of what we live to. This is our mantra. Everything that we do has to achieve a certain level of rigor when we add a new requirement, because obviously it has to meet the IAQG strategy. It has to be part of that. We develop a scope when we start a revision. It has to meet that scope. It has to be specific to quality management system standards, not contractual in nature, not sector specific, something that's important in the Americas, but in Asia Pacific, they could care less. It addresses our stakeholder needs, make sure that we're actually solving a problem, not just creating something for the sake of more requirements or creating a problem because we add new requirements. Making sure that what we have is very clear. We have a clarification process that we utilize through the OASIS database. Works great. We've gotten a lot of suggestions for additional clarity there. It's auditable. A lot of what's in there today is very difficult to audit to. There's several, even one word, like the word consider or as applicable. Those things can be very, very difficult, for an auditor when you get into it. And make sure it applies to all stakeholder segments, all businesses from a 5-person mom and pop shop to a mega company of 200,000 people plus, and doesn't alter the ISO text. And of course, the benefit outweighs the cost. Next. And real briefly, we're working on the AIM, which is the Aerospace Improvement Maturity Model. And we just released it in August 18th of this year. And go to the next slide. I'll talk real briefly about what it is. Just to give you a preview in Clause 10 improvement, we are looking at possibly putting in a requirement that you work towards a maturity model, maybe not being specific towards AIM, but make sure that you are working towards maturing your quality management system. And that's because of the value. Once again, I mentioned that a lot of the high-level VPs, OEMs of the OEMs have been talking about the value that they're seeing out of their quality management system. They get their certificate, but they really aren't seeing a lot of improvement in the quality of their products, and they're asking why. So this is actually giving them a roadmap on how to improve and move forward and maybe see some of those successes that they're not seeing today. Go to the next slide. This is the overall concept. You can see you have the standard itself. You have assessment criteria, our 5 maturity levels, which basically start out from the bare bottom and up to the best in class or world class. So with that, each one of those has assessment criteria that you would meet. And this is for every line item within the AS9100. And this is what makes it unique over any other maturity model out there, is ours is very specific. So every requirement within the standard is reflected in this AIM model. So you can target certain areas that you're having issues with or trouble with within your own company or even your supplier. So it gives you a tool to actually move from intangible to tangible. So you actually have a measure of how you're improving or where you're at today and how you might improve tomorrow. You go to the next slide. And these are those maturity levels. You can see level 1, of course, I said is your bare bottom, very high risk, obviously. You might achieve some of your outcomes by accident, or there might be a plan there, but it's not common, it's not cohesive. And then you move up the scale from moderate risk to mitigated risk, managed risks, and then, of course, optimizing at level 5. Go to the next slide. And I mentioned it was launched on August 18th. There's some training out there that we partnered with Plexus on. and we're working on some translations associated with that. And to date, we have over 10,000 accesses for that since August 18th. That's pretty good. So we have a lot of interest in it, and we're working on that. And this isn't just for aviation, space, and defense, because it utilizes the ISO 9001 as its baseline. So all of ISO 9001 is here, and that applies to every single industry within the world. So next. And real briefly talk about support material, where you can find it. Then I shall close. So we have support material for the 9100 series. You can see here we have specific material for 9100, 9110, 9120. And you can access it through the IAQG website and just pull up standards, and you'll see this come up, and then you can actually click read more, and it'll take you right to all that support material. And this is to help people be successful, and provides a really good resource for the users. Next. And we're also involved, or myself in particular, being the liaison to ISO Technical Committee 176 for the IAQG. We help them build their support material, which feeds our support material, which feeds our organizations and our suppliers. You can see kind of a single thread there, and this overall strategy. And you can see here that they have a whole suite of support material also. And next. And this is where you can find all that material. Okay, and I believe that might be my last slide. Actually, I have one more. And in summary, you know, QMS is a business management system. I wish we could take quality off of there and not call it a quality management system. I mean, that's the intended outcome, is to have better quality, but it just messes people up because they think it's the quality organization and not quality as a whole that everybody's responsible for. QMS principles should be built, you know, into the organizational structure, policies, processes, procedures. People just don't utilize the requirements the way that they're supposed to, or the way it was intended. You really look at the amount of improvement type or preventive type requirements within the standard. People should be lowering their defects. They should be improving their quality, and they get to their certification and basically they stop. And that's why we're developing some of these other tools like AIM, Aerospace Improvement Maturity Model, so they can actually progress and get the value that they're supposed to be getting right now, and could get if they actually work to the requirements the way that they were supposed to, or the way it was intended. Obviously, if you meet the requirements, you're doing fine, but that's just the starting point. That's your foundation. That's where you begin to improve, not just where you end. And of course, we want to drive performance. We want to make sure that the suppliers are healthy. We want to make sure our own companies are healthy. And that's really the reason we do all of this day in and day out. And it has to be the entire organization. Once again, it's not just quality, and it requires everyone to be involved. And that's a big challenge sometimes. And I believe that is my last slide. I want to thank you for the opportunity to present today, and I'll pass it on to Tim Lee and Becky to announce his presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alan. That was a great overview, especially of the 9100 series and everything that they're considering for the next revision. So our next speaker is Mr. Tim Lee from the Boeing Company, and also chair of the America's Aerospace Quality Group and the Registration Management Committee, or RMC. Tim is going to discuss the industry-controlled other party aviation, space, and defense quality management system certification. So welcome, Tim.
Well, thank you, Becky. Greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak here today at this webinar. Alan, outstanding job. Note to self, don't follow Alan. He does such a wonderful job. I especially liked your background, Alan. Of course, you were unable to put the unidentified flying object in yours like I have, but anyway, let's continue on. Okay, next slide, please, Becky. As Becky mentioned, I'm here to talk about the industry-controlled other party, or ICOP as we like to refer to it, and the Aviation, Space, and Defense Quality Management System Certification scheme that we manage in the International Aerospace Quality Group. As the slide indicates, I am the current chair of the America's Aerospace Quality Group Registration Management Committee, and I'm a supplier quality manager for the Boeing Company. Next slide, please. Just similar to Alan's information, probably some of this may repeat itself, but you know, it's all important to understand that we are a consortium of major aerospace primes you know, in all three global sectors in the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific. We all come together in a collaborative environment with our mission to achieve significant performance improvements in quality, delivery, and consequently cost on all products and services throughout the value stream. That was a key mission when we initiated the IAQG over 25 years ago to, even though we're staunch competitors in the market, Airbus versus Boeing, when it comes to quality and quality standards, we found a huge opportunity to work together to standardize those requirements across our supply chain and allow you, the user of the standards, to better understand and achieve a higher degree of quality. One of the principles that the Boeing Company is seeking information. So I commend all of you attending today, because that's exactly what you're doing, is seeking information and ensuring that you understand our scheme. So greatly appreciate you doing that today. In the presentation, I'll have some links. One of the key links is the IAQG website, and I tell everyone that's a great starting point to learn all things relative to our sector activity. Next slide, please. Alan's already mentioned the AS9100 series of quality management system standards, the 9100, the 9110, and the 9120. I won't belabor the point, but just recognize that when it comes to AQMS certification, those are the three standards that you can seek certification to. You can, if you are a manufacturer and you also have a core competency of distribution, you may want to seek 9100 and 9120 certification. We call that a combined and integrated audit, and there's leaf on audit duration, et cetera, if you choose to be certified to more than one standards. In addition, you may have a maintenance repair overhaul process, an FAA repair certification, for example, and you also have that as part of your core competency. Then in turn, you could seek 9100 along with 9110 certification. Or if you're just a repair maintenance organization, you can select any one of these standards and be certified to that independently. So again, those are the three AQMS standards in our scheme. Next slide, please. Oftentimes people ask, what is ICOP and how is our scheme managed? Again, one of the things we always say is that we utilize the ISO, as Alan mentioned, being part of the technical committee. We use ISO as our baseline. And when you look at the standard, any one of the three standards I mentioned before, there is ISO 9001 text verbatim in the standard, so it's just exactly the same requirements, but we supplement the ISO with aerospace unique requirements, things like control of non-conforming material, the producing product in controlled conditions. We recognize the criticality of a lot of our aviation, space, and defense product, so we do need those unique requirements to ensure our process is manufactured in a controlled environment. In Section 8 of the standard, there's an amplitude of requirements that highlight that. The certification scheme is no different. We link and we partnered with the International Accreditation Forum, as well as the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. But together with that baseline, we believe we have a comprehensive set of certification scheme requirements that ensures that our scheme is efficient, it can be recognized, and more importantly, it brings benefit and is beneficial to our stakeholders, and that's our scheme. Next slide, please. No scheme can be managed without understanding requirements, and the upper right-hand graphic really highlights how we utilize our industry-controlled other party standards, the 9104, 9103, and 9104-2 standards to really emphasize requirements. And the way those standards are laid out is basically the 9104-1 is the requirements for quality management system certification programs. The -3 is our auditor authentication and training standards. So it gives guidance on qualifications for an auditor to assess aerospace suppliers in our scheme. And then it's the old hold everyone accountable. We do have a very comprehensive oversight process defined in 9104-2, where every entity within our scheme is held accountable for conformance. I've mentioned the term ICOP on a number of occasions. We coined that phrase early on in this process because we wanted to be something different than just third party or the ISO scheme, if you will. And ICOP is a globally harmonized certification process defined by the IAQG. We use the term industry controlled because of the -2 oversight in our -1 requirements. We control this scheme through each sector by providing direct oversight and assessment of those entities, be it an accreditation body, be it a certification body that's operating in our scheme. And then other party, that's what we refer to as our certification activities that are conducted by accredited and recognized certification bodies and authenticated aerospace experience auditors that are recognized through ICOP process. So again, when you hear the term ICOP, recognize it's industry controlled. It's not simply third party, but at the same time, we ensure every entity within our scheme conforms to requirements. Next slide. We're very proud of our online aerospace supplier information system. It's been recognized as a certification scheme best practice, if you will. Best way to describe OASIS is a single authority reference source of all certification activity. Currently in our scheme, we have over 22,000 certified sites listed in the OASIS database. You can go there and gather both public information. So if you want to see companies that are certified, if you want to look at your own company's certification information, it will be contained within the OASIS database. What this has allowed us to do is to police unaccredited certificates that you may see out there in the industry. Let's face it, there's a lot of consultants running around assessing organizations, and some are very well informed, very well educated, now add value, but others may issue unaccredited certificates that give the impression that an organization is certified and it can be recognized. Well, the OASIS database is the authority source to validate that it truly is certified within our sector scheme. Again, audit results data can also be available. So if you get authorization from a certified organization, you can very quickly gain access to the audit results data to help support your external provider control processes. And the last thing about OASIS is we have an extensive feedback process within the database. Not only can you reach out and gather information from the certification body, but as Alan mentioned in our standards development, if you have an interpretation question about a standard, be it AS9100, AS9102 for first article, for example, you can actually go into the OASIS feedback process and communicate directly with the authors of the standard and get clarification. So excellent database recognized as an industry best practice. Next slide, please, Becky. This is our Americas sector. We are currently have 3 accreditation bodies. We just actually approved last week a new accreditation body in the Americas, but we do have ANAB and then Metro that accredit our certification bodies. We have Probitas, which authenticates auditors in the Americas, and as well as in Metro that authenticates auditors in Brazil. And then we have one training provider approval body. And as you can see, we have a host of certification bodies that are accredited in our scheme. Why is that important? Because it builds competition. We're still in control. And I always encourage you, those that are on the line, should you be seeking certification to one of the standards I mentioned, please go out to the OASIS database. You can find the list of accredited CBs we recognize, and I always recommend send 4 inquiries to 4 different certification bodies, and you will get competitive bids and information back very quickly. So next slide, please. Deployment support, Alan's already covered this, so I won't spend too much time on it, but please recognize that we do utilize the deployment support materials extensively to support certification. It's where you can go to seek information, to develop and maintain a continually improving quality management system. Also check back periodically that data and information changes. So as our SMEs update and recognize the need for additional information, they'll post that in the deployment support material. We're very proud of our supply chain management handbook. The best way to describe that tool, it's an encyclopedia of industry best practices. We recently updated a chapter within the SAMH. To give you an example, there was a lot of concern, I'll just say confusion, need for guidance as it relates to remote auditing and remote product acceptance. So we recently published a new chapter in the SAMH on those 2 topics. So if your company's looking at utilizing remote auditing techniques or even remote product acceptance, I encourage you to go out to the SAMH. And as one of my directors used to say, it's free, and download some of those best practices, and you'll see very comprehensive information that can support you. Alan's already mentioned the Aerospace Improvement Maturity Model. I always use the analogy of a grade card. You can be certified with a C-, but we don't want C- suppliers in our scheme. We want suppliers to continually strive to get better, to improve their quality. And what's really unique about this AIM model, it gives you the roadmap for that improvement and success. What does a high performing mature quality management system look like? Well, that's a level 5 within the AIM model. So please seek that if you need to. Next slide. Just a little bit about the benefits of our scheme. First and foremost, it gives your company opportunity. It is a globally harmonized certification scheme that is recognized by major aviation, space, and defense companies. Basically, the who's who across aerospace all recognize our certification scheme. It supports supplier approval activities with a recognized quality management system certification approach. It uses a process approach, not the gotcha approach, to conformance assessment. And it's about exceeding customer expectations and focuses on that. It's not without risk. I used an analogy, it gives the supplier the driver's license. It doesn't prevent them from procuring from poor performing suppliers, and it's not certification of products. So please recognize that. Next slide. And this is my big thank you, and to get off the stage slide, I always welcome this opportunity to seek information and learn, and greatly appreciate the opportunity today to come to the Ohio Aerospace Industries and SAE's webinar. And again, our goal, our aim is to have a certification scheme that's efficient, recognized, and beneficial. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Tim, for that great overview and the detail on IAQG and all of its programs and activities, including ICOP and OASIS. Anyone with questions for Tim, you can email Tim directly, or we can do some question and answer right now. We have about 10 minutes available. If people want to enter questions into the chat feature for any of the speakers that we've listened to so far this morning, feel free to do so. Just looking at the chat feature really quick here, it looks like we have one question. Any CDP points that will be raised after this webinar? I'm not familiar with CDP. I don't know if any of our speakers recognize that.
Are they looking for continually personal development points? Oftentimes when you attend training sessions and things of that nature, Becky, they're given hours or points for personal development. That may be the question.
Okay, that helps a lot then. So this particular webinar does not have points associated with it. But does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to enter them into the chat feature, and we have a few minutes here to address those for any of the speakers that we've listened to so far this morning. We'll give it 1 minute here and see if anyone has a question. Just scanning the chat really quick here to see if I missed anything. But if no one, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to comment, you know, speaking today, I did learn something because I knew I was speaking to the people from the great state of Ohio, and I didn't really know right away, but somewhere I learned where engagement with Ohio was, and I didn't realize it was directly in between Dayton and Marion, Ohio. So I thought I'd mention that today. I did learn something.
Great to hear.
I know everyone's laughing inside, so.
So we do have another question here. How is it going with OASIS version 3?
Excellent question, Aaron. So, but anyway, I don't know if Aaron asked that, but what they're referring to is we are in the process of developing a new database. We've chosen to an off-the-shelf platform provided by a company by the name of Intact. OASIS V3 is in development right now. We're forecasting launch in January of next year. All the functionality will be the same, but those of you that are familiar with databases recognize the look, the search, those type of things will be different, but the data will be the same. So I thought about including that today, but I'm sure the audience didn't want to get into that detail, but recognize there are ongoing webinars that are available. So back to that IAQG source, please reach out there if you're interested more about OASIS V3. Sign up for the general user and supplier webinars that will begin. I think the first one is next Tuesday on the 14th, and you'll learn more about that database that's coming in 2022. Okay.
All right, great. Thank you, Tim. So I don't see any more questions right now. So we're going to proceed to take a 10-minute break, and we will return in 10 minutes. Your screen will count down for you to let you know when we have 1 minute left. So join us in 10 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good break and had a chance to get another cup of coffee there. So our next speaker is Mr. Aaron Troshnetz, the General Manager, North America Quality Assessments Division, Information Security Services with Smithers. Aaron is going to talk to us about the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC. Welcome, Aaron.
Thanks, Becky. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, loud and clear.
Excellent. So thank you all for being here today. I am excited to share some additional information. I'm sure many of you, certainly if you do work in the defense industrial base or DIB, are quite familiar with the acronym CMMC. As some of you may be aware, there were some recent developments with CMMC, which I'll kind of go through, as well as in the brief time that we have together, some very basic tips and tricks as to some of the major areas of CMMC that every organization should be working on accordingly. So if we can go to the next slide, Becky. You can go to the next slide too. Excellent, thank you. So we'll talk about this thing called evolution to CMMC 2.0. And again, those of you that have done work in the DIP now for some time are probably quite familiar with CMMC. You've certainly heard some of the rumblings associated with it. So we'll go through what some of the major differences are with the CMMC 2.0, as we're calling it. We'll talk about the three important building blocks supporting CMMC. I think a lot of folks can certainly get absorbed in all of the controls, requirements, different pieces of the standard itself. However, I think there are three basic building blocks that organizations should be focused on. And then the last piece of this is we'll share some practical next steps for DIB suppliers. I did have the benefit of being part of a discussion just yesterday, in fact, with the DIBCAC, which is associated with the Department of Defense, talking about CMMC and what organizations should be focused on. So I think it's really important everyone is focused on the appropriate next steps and getting ready for the increased requirements that we're all faced with in the cybersecurity arena. So next slide, please. So just recently, like I said, we did come about with now CMMC 2.0. CMMC 2.0 came out as far as an announcement from the DoD on November 4th, 2021. So you can see we're hot off the press here, about a month or so since the announcement. The major pieces of CMMC 2.0, and you can see the illustration on the top right, are really focused on a few different pieces here, and I'll briefly summarize them. So the first piece is the elimination of the maturity model add-on requirements. So if any of you have spent any time with the CMMC standard itself, which has now been out for a couple of years, you will recall there were maturity model add-on requirements, much in the mold of CMMI type requirements. Those are now gone. And essentially what we have, which is the second item that's illustrated here, is 100% practice, as they're calling it, each of the practices that are requirements, full alignment with the standard called NIST 800, 171, as well as 172. We have also now with CMMC Model 2.0 moved from a 5-level hierarchy of requirements down to a 3. And if you spend any time with CMMC 1.0, you will recall CMMC level 2 and level 4 were kind of pass-through type requirements to the supporting level 3 and level 5. This has now been all condensed down to a simple 3-level hierarchy of requirements. And again, within the level 2, as you see here on the right illustration, that is 100% practice alignment with the NIST 800 171 standard. The level 3, which I think only a handful or very few organizations are going to see, is actually in alignment with another NIST standard called NIST 800 172. But that particular level is still under some development, so I would caution folks of running out and getting too concerned about that. That is some requirements that we are still waiting for some additional information associated with. But the main ingredients, the main body of it, most organizations are going to be faced with probably level 2 at most. That is strictly NIST 800-171, and that's a standard that has been out for some time. The other piece of this that I think it's important for folks to understand with CMMC 2.0 is within this 3-level hierarchy, the associated assessment model has shifted as well. So when we talk about level 1 requirements, which is really the foundation requirements, it's all focused around FCI. That is self-assessment only. As CMMC Model 2.0 has come out, they have clearly communicated that if you are a CMMC Level 1 required organization, you will only be required to self-attest. And I think that's important because previous with 1.0, there were going to be some third-party assessment type models involved. That has now all gone away, and it's a self-assessment type structure, which most companies are familiar with NIST 800-171, and probably what you've uploaded in systems called SPURS, if that sounds familiar. That is all now stayed the same. There will be no third party associated with level 1 as it pertains to CMMC level 2, or I'm sorry, level 1. Level 2, which again is complete alignment with the NIST 800-171 requirements, interestingly has 2 paths associated with it. So some organizations are going to be allowed to self-assess with level 2 requirements. However, some others, based on what they're calling prioritization, will require a third-party assessment on a triannual basis, which is every 3 years for the purposes of what they'll be looking for. We are still waiting for more information on what prioritized means. That is in the works right now, but that is clearly going to be based on criticality, certainly level of CUI, the level of defense contract work associated with the company, but those companies are going to elevate to some type of third party regular assessment activity, again, every 3 years. And then finally, level 3, which again, I can't stress enough, this is not going to be a huge amount of companies in the DIB, but it will be some portion of the companies with some critical contract type work. Those will be requirements that will be third party assessed, and those will be, as they're calling it, government-led assessments. And what that basically means is those are assessments which we've already received confirmation will be led by the DoD and specifically the DIBCAC in terms of conducting those activities. So again, this is a bit of a shift with 1.0. This has all come out in the last 30 days or month or so. So we are trying to get organizations aware of these changes. And again, certainly familiar with the requirements as we move forward with some of the assessments that will be done. Next slide, please, Becky. So I think with that brief summary on the 2.0 changes involved, I think it's always important to bring it back to some of the building blocks supporting CMMC, because we often get the question, we perform assessments ourselves, what should I be doing as an organization to get ready for CMMC? And certainly getting aligned with NIST 800-171, if your organization is not already, is a very important step. But I think even prior to that, there's a few building blocks that I would call them that really support a solid foundation with CMMC that every organization should be focused on. So the first one, starting on the left, is the critical ingredient, if you will, when it pertains to CMMC, and that is controlled unclassified information, or CUI, as we call it. CUI is really the main centerpiece that governs CMMC, specifically as you get into CMMC 2.0 level 2, which they're calling it now. And that's any information while still not classified, that requires some level of protection from unauthorized access and release given specific laws, regulations, and any governmental-wide policies. So that's kind of an all-encompassing definition. You could imagine that could include quite a few things if you were a supplier within the DIB. A great resource out there for you to consider beyond things like blueprints, specifications, where requirements are typically flowed down, is the CUI National Archives website. And I've actually included a link here. That gives a great resource in terms of the categories involved with CUI. And frequently that's cited within any contract or discussion with any kind of CUI definition as the go-to resource for whether or not something is CUI or not. And again, CUI is the information we're taking measures to protect at the end of the day from any of our adversaries or any folks that are trying to put our organizations and the information we handle into harm's way. The next important building block is scoping. And scoping certainly comes into lens with any certification. A simple definition for scoping is the boundaries of the contractor's overall environment, which would be assessed under CMMC requirements. And as you can imagine, with that kind of definition in mind, scoping is critical. We see organizations that underscope, overscope, so it's really important to have a good lay of the land as it pertains to what's in and what's out with your CMMC certification. And there's a few different important factors that I tell organizations to consider scoping. So the first one is how the contractor specifically, and there's 3 actions involved here. 1, process, store, and transmit CUI. And again, go back to the definition of CUI. Assuming you're handling CUI, how are you processing, how are you storing, and how are you transmitting that information? Very important. The second one is how you support these different activities within what they call different assets. And assets are anything from data centers, VPN type environments, cloud-based solutions, which quite a few organizations use a combination of on-prem and cloud. So it's really important you understand the controls associated with assets. And then the third area to consider through really 4 different definition sets is how do you manage that information in terms of people, technology, facilities, and very important external service providers. So any folks you have externally performing different activities, whether it be some type of cloud storage, any on-prem management of your data, those folks are very important to consider within the scope of your CUI and how it's being managed. Really a great resource, and I included a link here, is the Cybersecurity Model Certification Scoping Guidance, which in fact just came out just a couple of days ago. And for at least CMMC 2.0 Level 1 and Level 2, they have defined guidance. Level 3 is probably going to come out in the next few months. So those are really the first 2 important building blocks. The third one I would mention are POAMs, or Plan of Action and Milestones. And POAMs, as they're frequently referred to, is basically just an action plan that is an output of the assessment, whether it be internal or external, which generally includes assignment, timing of any identified gap areas. POAMs are really another critical block, especially now with CMMC 2.0, in that POAMs are now allowed as part of CMMC 2.0, with the exception of any of the highest weighted requirements, and we're still waiting for some definition with that. But under CMMC 1.0, POAMs were not remotely acknowledged, were certainly not allowed in any defined circumstances. POAMs are now in CMMC 2.0 and will be allowed, assuming they fit a specific definition, for a strict time-bound basis of 180 days, or roughly 6 months. So POAMs are another important step, I think, as to this whole premise that CMMC is a journey that we go into as far as continual conformance and compliance with the requirements, much in the same mold in many ways as AS9100 series type requirements. POAMs are an opportunity for organizations to continually raise the bar when it comes to their cybersecurity controls. And again, POAMs are an important piece to the CMMC structure. There is some really good information. Again, I included another link. There was a recent DIBCAC presentation, which I've included the link to, public information for any organizations that are aware, that gives some good guidance and kind of tips and tricks when it pertains to POAMs and what organizations should keep in mind. Next slide, please. So kind of in closing, as we wrap up here, and again, I want to be respectful of the brief time that I'm fortunate to be spending with you guys today amidst all these other great speakers that we have. But where I wanted to conclude is just some practical next steps for DIB suppliers. And I tried to keep this simple as much as possible, because I think there's a lot of information flying around in the cybersecurity arena. And it's really important to keep it simple above everything else. So the first practical next step is, if you haven't already, I would certainly recommend that you and your organization take the time to understand the extent of your CUI. Certainly sitting down with a cross-functional team, not just the IT guys, so to speak, but a cross-functional team representing different areas of your company that may be coming into contact with or taking in customer data is very important. And having those CUI discussions and understanding where is the CUI, how it's being handled, much as the previous slide indicated. So with that CUI discussion in mind, the second item I identify here, and this is a very powerful tool, if you haven't done this in some shape or form, is taking the time to put together what's called a topology diagram. And a lot of IT folks use this as kind of to lay out the lay of the land with different IT assets, different systems, interfaces. We think of process maps and process flows very similar, but just from a system view. How do things connect? Where interfaces? So if you haven't done one of those exercises, especially as a lead-in to CMMC, I would highly recommend it. And then finally, 3, perform your baseline gap assessment. If you haven't already, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that if you are supplying the DIB currently, you have contract flow requirements already that require you to be in compliance with NIST 800-171. And just based on the discussion we had with the DIBCAC yesterday, the individual who spoke on the DIBCAC's behalf was very clear that those requirements are expected, that organizations are in compliance with those today. So to think that CMMC 2.0, especially level 2, is going to be a huge jump for organizations is a bit of a struggle for the DIBCAC, because according to them, those requirements should be in place right now. So I would stress, if you're an organization, maybe you need some help in the area of gap assessments with NIST 800-171. There are external resources out there that can perform those types of services. And I would certainly recommend you take the time to conduct those activities to see where your gaps are and how you can bring yourself closer in with those requirements. So with that, that is my last slide, I believe, Becky.
It is. So thank you very much, Aaron, for that great overview of CMMC and all of the updates in the 2.0. Again, if anyone has questions for Aaron, we encourage you to enter those into the chat box, and we can answer those during our next Q&A session, or we can connect you with Aaron after this webinar to get some more answers and information. So thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Larry Bennett, Consulting Engineer, Global Sourcing Quality and Supply Chain Division at GE Aviation. Larry's going to give us an overview of the Aerospace Engine Supplier Quality Strategy Group and the new AS13100 standard. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you very much, Becky. Privileged to be a part of this effort today, and hopefully we'll share some information that'll be useful and helpful to you. Next, please. So I thought we'd start today with a little bit of background on the Aero Engine Supplier Quality Strategy Group, background and origination, and where we came from and what we're doing. So the aero engine manufacturers created this collaborative working group in 2013. It actually was birthed out of a request from our local DCMA, and they were wondering why the aero engines team couldn't come together and reconcile and standardize some of the common issues they were seeing across the military base. And so that was birthed. They used the automotive example of QS9000 at the time with the big three as the model. And the purpose was to simplify and standardize the aero engine supplier quality requirements through the removal of duplication of waste, create a common language, build on existing industry standards where they did exist, create requirements that are simple, prescriptive, and auditable, promote the use of standardized third-party training, deliver results with pace, and focus on effective deployment and improve the capability of the shared supply chains. Next. And these are the 10 voting members of the strategy group, as shown at the top there. Probably recognize a number of those entities. And we also have other members of the ASQ group who are not voting members, but they are associate members. You can see those at the bottom as well. Next. And these are the actual individuals within those voting team members that are the actual voting representatives. Again, just put some face to names. You may recognize some of those individuals. And it's important also at this point to mention that when we push out initiatives through the ASQ group, it's not just GE, it's not just Pratt or Rolls or one of the individual organizations. It's the entire aero engines team and industry coming together and trying to push and elevate the program and the products. Next. So the vision of ASQ is to establish and maintain a common set of quality requirements that enable the global aero engine supply chain to be truly competitive through lean capable processes and a culture of continuous improvement. And everything we do in the ASQ is guided by that vision. Next. Another thing we do that's really interesting as part of our supplier forum, and prior to the pandemic, we were actually having real, live, interactive, engaging supplier forums with hundreds of individuals participating. And what we do is we allow suppliers, rather than the aero engine member companies sharing success, we allow the suppliers to share success, because there's no more powerful voice than an actual supplier making an example of a best practice, something they've taken from a standard and shown practical, tangible results. Very powerful from example and best practice. You see some studies there and what was accomplished. Next. So now let's pivot to the AS13100. Before we dive into this topic, let me just kind of preface it and say that this was it took a little less than 3 years to go from concept to publication. And those of you that are involved in these types of industry activities certainly should have an appreciation that that is a remarkable achievement. Just kudos to the team that worked together to accomplish this. And I also like to use this as an opportunity to share a little bit of my own passion for this. So prior to joining GE 16 years ago, I was in the supplier world as a supplier quality manager, working in the supply chain when AS9100 was pushed out, when all of the NADCAP structure was pushed out. So quite a bit of experience in the quality system. And as a supplier, wondering why all the customer requirements were different, why they couldn't standardize and rationalize some of those. And so then fast forward to GE, and when my people leader came to me in August of 2018 and asked if I would be interested in joining a team to standardize the quality system requirements. Yeah, you can imagine after just a slight hesitation, only to catch my breath. It was absolutely yes, and I was privileged and pleased to be a part of that writing team that helped carry this forward. Next. So you can see where we were prior to pushing this standard out. You know, we had regulator requirements, we had customer requirements, and then we have industry requirements, and then each of the aero engine manufacturers had their own set of requirements. If you're a GE supplier, you know it's S1000. If you're a Rolls-Royce, you know it's Sabre, etc. And then those were all flowed down to the aero engine supply chain. Yes, it's a complex regulated industry, but it doesn't have to be nearly as complex and as exhaustive as it is. Next. So this is a slide that shows you how the 13100 was established. You take the existing customer requirements on the left, combined with the existing AS 13000 series documents. Excuse me. And then you've got the OEM unique requirements, and you turn those into the future state where we have reduced the overall number of requirements more than 50%. And I'm remiss not to mention the supporting guidance and best practice material that's shown as a reference on the bottom. So the AS 13100 is the standard. It is the requirements. It contains all the shalls. The supporting guidance and best practice reference manuals is all free, and it's all how to accomplish or how to comply with the standard. Just an exhaustive amount of information. Similar to what was mentioned previously with the Supply Chain Management Handbook, this is just an unbelievable amount of information that shows how to and what are some of the best practices for handling and addressing each of the key components of the standard. Next. Also want to mention that we didn't create a new structure. We didn't create a new numbering scheme. We play on the existing AS9100 numbering structure and paragraph references, and just add additional supplemental to those individual parenthetical references. Next. There are still some customer-specific requirements, and those have been reduced significantly, but there are some that we couldn't rationalize as an industry. Hopefully in versions 2 and 3 coming down the pike years from now. This, just like all the other AS documents, will have its regular 5-year review unless something pushes forward sooner that necessitates that. Next. And just some of the requirement highlights. This page shows you the organization type and each paragraph reference and how it applies to each of the different types of organizations. So whether you are a make-to-print supplier, whether you are a design responsible supplier, combination thereof, whether you're a processor or a service provider or a distributor, and clearly shows you each and every section and whether it applies to your type of organization or not. And then on the right is the organization type and the certification, quality system certification required for that type of organization. Next. Continue on with some of the highlights. We have a compliance assessment required. We have developed an Excel-based spreadsheet with a heat map you see kind of showing there where you can go section by section, similar to what you would expect with any other standard AS9100, you know, when it was deployed originally. And when we go to a revision, you go paragraph requirement by requirement and state how you're meeting that requirement through your quality system. So really the same kind of principle. And we have a timeline for suppliers to be compliant to this standard by the end of next year. So we gave them what we consider to be a really long runway to accomplish the certification, not certification, to accomplish compliance to. Sorry, I misspoke there. Next. And we have a reference manual 13,009 that walks through that process of how to comply. Some of the other things, requirements, highlights, section 8.3 has a significant amount of requirements for design and development, including the use of PFMEA as a recommendation for the design risk analysis, and some other key considerations for design and development for those suppliers that might be a supplier design source. Reference manual 13,008 has significant guidance for the design workspace. Next. Section 8.4 deals with supplier control. This is not the prime supplier. This is the prime supplier subtier. And we in the Aero Engines group, as well as I think everyone across the aerospace landscape, recognizes the risk associated with supplier control. And thus we have an extensive amount of requirements associated with a subtier, from the evaluation and selection to the control and performance monitoring. And reference manual 13,007 provides the guidance material for this key topic. Next. By now, you should be able to see the benefits. We have a single standard that's aligned to AS9100 and ISO 9001, less requirements for the supplier. And we've already stated that's significantly 50% or more less, lower cost. Suppliers do not have to buy multiple standards. I think I failed to mention that the existing AS 13,000 series documents, except for 13,001, 13,001 deals with the DPRV, the supplier release piece, and that's going to stay as a standalone free document. The other 13,000 series documents will expire at the end of next year, and they have been replaced inside of the 13,100 standard for the shalls, and the guidance has been moved to the applicable reference manuals. So lower cost. The only cost that will have to be incurred is the cost for buying the actual 13,100 standard. Supported with free issue reference manuals. If I didn't mention that, all the reference manual material is free. It obviously will minimize the content of the OEM supplier requirement standards, creates a common language, aligns the relevant industry standards, supported by global approved training resources, enables the ASQ OEMs to provide a harmonized approach to supplier development and control. Supplier compliance continues to be assessed through customer audit. It allows the ASQ to focus on supply chain capability development. Next. I mentioned this is the supporting reference manuals. Link to that. Again, all free information. We also, to piggyback the reference manuals, they are now under the auspices of a subject matter interest group. Subject matter interest groups are led by member companies. The only participants on the subject matter interest group are the member company personnel, and they are responsible to keep the guidance material, the reference manuals, up to date, current, fresh, in scope. Make sure we don't have scope creep. Make sure we don't put any shalls, any requirements, and make sure it stays tangible and applicable to the needs of the industry. And we asked the question, okay, if this is locked to just member companies, what do we do for suppliers that want to get engaged? So we created a community of practice where any supplier and anyone in the industry can join and have a discussion and a dialogue and communicate on the updates to the RM, even provide feedback for consideration for future revisions of the standard. So we I think we're upwards of several hundred in each of these community of practice. I think we've launched maybe upwards of 7 or 8 communities of practice, and we have significant involvement already. We have a LinkedIn account, I think, for each of those groups. And so that's very viable. And the goal here is to make sure that the industry is working together and partnering to push forward and to help change the dynamics and the landscape and the trajectory of what we're trying to accomplish. Next. We think this is a really good chart. We're actively engaging each supplier on the GE perspective. We have each supplier has their own quality contact, and we're asking each of those quality contacts in their regular touch points with suppliers to talk about this on a weekly, bi-weekly, whatever their rhythm is for their touch points. Make sure we're asking, are you using the milestone plan? Are you on target? Are you on point? And you can see by now we should be nearing the end of 2021. We ought to be working on the gap analysis, and we ought to be working on updates to the QMS. Because again, the goal is to be at the end of next year and not have any surprises. So it's not one of those initiatives where we're just willing to throw it over the wall and hope it happens. We're trying to partner as an industry and with the supply chain to make sure we're there in advance. We've got supplier forums. We've had regular touch points with our suppliers on an individual member company and as an industry to try to continue to push the message. Let's work on this. Let's not wait till Q3, Q4 of next year and hope it happens. Next.
So thank you very much, Larry, for that great overview of the Aero Engine Supplier Quality Strategy Group and the new AS 13100. There are a lot of support materials related to that standard. So if anyone has questions on that for Larry, feel free to enter it in the chat box or contact us later and we will get those answers for you. So thanks again, Larry.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Our next speaker is Ethan Akins, Senior Business Development Manager, Aerospace at the Performance Review Institute. And Ethan is going to provide us with a NADCAP overview. So welcome, Ethan.
Thanks for inviting me to talk at this event with these fellow gentlemen. I'm actually taking a lot of notes. It's nice to listen to what's going on in the industry. And again, how it relates to all these other programs that we're working on. So if you want to go to the next slide. So what I want to talk about, pretty much is a NADCAP overview. And I'm glad I have a couple extra minutes to talk because it's something that I'm extremely an advocate of, is the NADCAP program and supplier quality oversight and ensuring that we're making proper hardware and for critical flight safety. So if you want to go to the next slide. What I want to talk about is pretty much just a program summary, just a quick summary of where the NADCAP program started, what it is, and what's the goal of the program. After that, I'll talk a little bit about the quality value of the program and how it relates to a lot of the topics that the previous gentlemen have talked about. And then some program statistics, where the NADCAP program is, how we're a global organization, accreditations, about the stakeholders that are involved in the program. So if you go to the next slide. So what's the NADCAP program? Next slide. I really enjoy this slide and those top 4 words across the top, because that really summarizes what the NADCAP program is about. It's about compliance. So it's an auditing program of the supply chain to ensure compliance to customer requirements and specifications. It's controlling the process to ensure that we're getting that consistent products and a high quality product that gets manufactured. Cost savings for both the suppliers and for the primes involved in the program. And the biggest thing is risk reduction. I've heard a few of the other gentlemen this morning already talk about risk, and that's really what the quality system's about, is trying to reduce that reduction of risk. So the NADCAP program, it's a globally industry managed program that's administered by the Performance Review Institute. The Performance Review Institute is a global organization. We have offices in London, Beijing, Shanghai, and the headquarters is located here in Warrendale, right outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The program does superior independent audits. So we do very in-depth audits of critical processes. And those critical processes then support the quality system that the organization has. It's a fresh set of eyes, which is very key and critical to the program as well. So instead of the OEMs coming in and auditing with their employees, looking at their same requirements over and over again, it's nice to have that fresh set of eyes come in and look and question some things and catch those potential things that are being missed. It's agency recognized and accepted. So the NADCAP program is an aerospace program. It's looking at aerospace suppliers and ensuring the manufacturing of the hardware, but it's recognized outside of the aerospace industry as well. From talking to stakeholders, I know automotive, electronics, medical, other OEMs in the space industry are looking at suppliers that have that NADCAP accreditation because they understand what it means and what it means for the quality within their organization. And the final thing is it's a win-win value. The program works with suppliers and the OEMs and the primes to try to reduce the cost and standardize this critical process audit step. So instead of having multiple primes coming into a supplier and doing audits, it replaces those audits. It replaces those redundant audits and shares that information. That also then is a cost savings for suppliers because instead of having multiple audits a year or preparing for multiple audits a year, it helps save your resources to prepare for just that one audit. Next slide. So the NADCAP program was actually created in 1990 by a group of OEMs working with SAE. And that's when the Performance Review Institute was created to administer the NADCAP program. We use a program called eAuditNet. It's for informatics solutions. I'm sure many people are familiar with our NADCAP program, but it's how we manage all the audits and the information that we share amongst the OEMs and the organizations. You can see there that the FAA does recognize NADCAP as an official party for verification to help prevent the risk and help the OEMs manage their supply chain base. One of the little key information, the little facts I like to give when I talk is the use of the term NADCAP in all capital letters. You can see the FAA has this down, and originally we were the National Aerospace and Defense Contractors Accreditation Program, NADCAP. Over the years, we have developed so much and we have grown that we are now an international accreditation program. So instead of the all capitals NADCAP, it's now what you see at the top right corner. It's a NADCAP organization. I like to laugh. I don't think Apple would enjoy if we had, INADCAP for international NADCAP, but yep. So currently we're known as the NADCAP accreditation program. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about the NADCAP program as an industry managed program, and I get lots of questions on what exactly does that mean, industry managed program. So what that means is that we have experts from the industry and the government that are meeting and collaborate to make the program requirements and are very involved in the oversight of the program. So experts from the industry and government, those are the OEMs and the primes. We have GE and Boeing on the line. They're two of our stakeholders. GE, BAE, Lockheed, NASA, Northrop Grumman. All of these experts meet and they create the program requirements and manage the oversight of it. So they define the operational program requirements. All of the program requirements are defined in operating procedures. If you're familiar with the program, they're called OPs and then a 4-digit number. That the operating program procedures are, how to schedule an audit, how to review an audit, proper reviewing statistics of it, how to respond to NCRs and the proper steps of that. They also establish the requirements for the critical manufacturing process accreditation, otherwise known as the audit criteria. So when we go out and we look to do those NADCAP audits of the critical processes, we audit to audit criteria. Those audit criteria are actually developed and made from the stakeholders of the program, suppliers and the OEMs as well. And then we accredit the suppliers. And that's giving them that plaque on the wall that said, you are accredited to NADCAP's critical process, and you excel in the quality of producing for that critical process. The results in this is a standardized approach to quality assurance and a decrease in redundant audits. And that's pretty much what the core of the NADCAP program is. You want to go to the next slide there, Becky? Currently, we have 23 commodities and we're constantly growing. You can look across there. Originally, we started off as a program doing special processing audits, but as we've grown, it turned into more critical processing auditing. Something like aerostructures assembly, where the assemble of the productions for the airplane, of the wing assembly. Trying to look at some of our new ones. Measurement and inspection is another newer group that has come into development in the last 5 years, where they're looking at the tools and the equipment to actually do the measurement and inspection of the final product to ensure it's meeting the customer requirements. Another newer group was within our welding group. We're moving into additive manufacturing now as well. There's a checklist within there that covers additive manufacturing. And as the program is growing and that section of the commodity is growing, I'm pretty sure we're going to be looking to pull that out and make that an additional commodity as well. Do you want to go to the next slide, Becky? So the industry managed program outcomes, and this is pretty much just a brief synopsis of some of the wins that come out of the NADCAP program and why working within the industry program really works well. It's working with the industry to, again, work together to make those audit criteria and satisfy the requirements of all the participants. So it's not just the OEM sitting there putting the audit criteria together. The supplier voice and speaking up when we do those audit criteria develop are very important to make sure that we're not missing anything. And it's to make sure that their voice is heard and that the program is giving the benefit that it needs to give. It replaces the routine audits. So instead of having the multiple primes coming in, it's a one-time audit that comes in and they all can use for the information and that risk mitigation that they need. I'm not going to read through all of these. It's a lot of repeat of some of the things I've said prior. But again, it's those 4 topics I talked about at the beginning: reducing the cost, improving the supplier quality with stringent requirements, providing more frequent audits on behalf of the OEMs and fewer audits for the suppliers. And again, it utilizes auditors who are subject matter experts in critical processes. We have a very strict process of onboarding and recruiting auditors where the participants of the program actually are part of the interview process to make sure that the auditors coming in are subject matter experts and they are doing a good job in reviewing the critical process that they're auditing to. Next slide, Becky. So we'll talk a little bit now about the NADCAP program and the quality value it provides to the suppliers and to the subscriber base. Next slide. So you've heard the, Jonathan Allen and Tim earlier talk about, quality accreditations and the various standards. And a 9100 audit and the quality audits that they have, they're very high level audits for the supply base, as you all know. They're looking to put the foundations for the programs and the processes within the supply base. You see the essential elements of the 9100 certificate there. I just put a couple bullets there. But it's setting the leadership goals, making sure that there's procedures and processes in place, looking and making sure there's proper planning and implementation. You're looking at the KPIs. You're looking at setting up process improvements. You're making sure that there's proper training and risk and these high-level plans in place. So then what the NADCAP audit does, if you want to go next slide there, Becky. During our audits, we're actually looking at and doing job audits of processes at specific requirements being flowed down to make sure that quality certification and those high-level requirements are being met. So I was trying to find the best word to say, and I came up that the NADCAP audits complement the quality accreditations. It says that you have a quality standard, you're certified to 9100, When we come in and do a NADCAP audit, we're looking at the critical process. We're making sure that you have flowed down and interpreted the customer requirements properly and correctly, and that your processing steps are doing what you say they do. You have proper training. If you had corrective actions, that you're looking at those corrective actions and you're putting proper corrective actions in place. It's really doing a deep dive in to the smaller processes that flow up into the general quality standard. You want to go to the next slide, Becky? I tried to figure out how I can explain the biggest difference between your quality standards and your certifications of 9100 and a NADCAP audit. So as Jonathan Allen and Tim talked about, they talked about how the industry develops the quality standards. From there, it goes off and certification bodies go out and conduct audits to those standards, and then they resolve the findings and they grant certifications. So once the industry develops the standard, they're not really involved in the auditing of those standards. When you look at the NADCAP program, the industry develops the critical process audit criteria. So they're looking at how we want to audit to chem processing, heat treat, the various commodities that we're looking at. From there, PRI performs an audit with industry-approved auditors. So if you notice, I have that block kind of like a faded color. So we have industry involved in making sure that we get the proper auditors to review and audit the companies. And at the same time, PRI then manages those auditors and manages the audit process. After that, the audit's complete. PRI has technical experts where we review those audits and we review and resolve those audit findings. So we're saving time from the subscribers, the primes, to look at those, and we work very closely with the auditees, the suppliers, to make sure those NCRs and those non-conformances are resolved and they have good corrective actions in place. After that, the industry then approves those audit plans and those NCRs and how those audits or NCRs work, and they grant that accreditation. So industry is really involved in every step of a NADCAP accreditation. Next slide, Becky. When I was trying to break down how the NADCAP program supports like the 9100 quality accreditation, and I broke across, I think, the 6 main topics of 9100: leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. And with the NADCAP critical process audit, again, we go in there and we do those job audits, those compliance audits to say, you know, this customer wants this part made in this way. We follow it from start to end, from the flow down to the requirements to make sure everything was properly flowed down, to the processing, to the testing, to the training of the individuals, the calibration of the equipment, the solution analysis to make sure that they're properly, you know, processing the parts in the right solutions. For heat treatment, you know, we're looking at the ovens and at their SATs and TUSs to ensure those are proper and those numbers are falling in line and they're doing the corrective actions. We're looking at the KPIs and actions to make sure that, you know, for chem processes, let's say for an example, they're looking at the throughput and the improvement of that. So it's supporting their quality certification and showing that, yes, we have a quality certification, and NADCAP is coming in and doing that deep dive in and saying this supplier has a good quality system in place, and so has that NADCAP accreditation for chem processing or whatever the other critical process is. Next slide, Becky. So I wanted to touch base a little bit about NADCAP statistics and where we are. Next slide, Becky. The NADCAP program, it's been around since 1990, and we've grown exponentially year after year after year. Currently, we're looking at about 8,300 NADCAP process accreditations globally. I have a breakdown there of the various critical processes and the amount of accreditations that we have. I just ran these numbers last month, so this is fairly updated information. You can see our biggest commodities on the list will be chem processing and heat treating on this list. They've been around since almost the start of the program. And you can notice a commodity like aerostructures assembly currently only has 22. It's a newer commodity that was started within the last 7 years. If you go to the next slide, I have the listing of the other commodities. You see NDT, our largest accreditations at almost 2,000 accreditations currently. And then I talked a little bit about M&I, a newer group, which is already up to 171 accreditations. So there is a lot of growth and a lot of interest in these accreditations from our stakeholders. Next slide. So those accreditations, those 8,300 accreditations are actually, again, it's a global program where we have accredited suppliers in 52 countries worldwide. You can see we sorted this by highest to lowest. Again, it was a program based out of the United States, and it's gradually grown into the global program it is right now. And it goes into United Kingdom and China and France and Japan. And every year we're growing further and further. We've been doing a lot of symposiums where we're going to various locations to talk in the program and answer and ask, you know, the suppliers, what more can we do and how can we help the program grow? One of the big things we've done over this pandemic, and I didn't speak on it, was setting up a way to do virtual audits and virtual verification audits to continue on with the NADCAP accreditation program, but also for our stakeholders and our subscribers to have that confidence that we're getting into the suppliers and making sure that that quality value is still there. It's been a long road. It's been very difficult, but it's something that we're very proud of our virtual auditing format and how we've set it up as well. Next slide. What I did is I kind of broke it down to the Ohio companies. I figured since, you know, we were talking here, that it'd be interesting to see, you know, where the NADCAP accreditations lie within Ohio. And we have almost 300 accreditations in the Ohio state. You can see the various commodities. Again, I ran this just last month, so this information is fairly updated. If you want to go to the next slide, Becky, I think I'm almost done. Oh, and these are the 58 subscribers that are part of the program. Again, this list is constantly growing. You notice a lot of familiar names there on the list. We have NASA as part of the program and starting to get involved, and we're getting more space interest in the program as well. Like I said earlier, I do know a lot of space companies that look and see a NADCAP accreditation and they understand the quality value of it. So they're more, you know, they're looking for those suppliers to have this type of accreditation. And I think that's it. Yeah. Again, if you have any questions about the NADCAP program, more than happy to answer them for you. We have a great group of staff to talk about this, and we'll answer any of the questions you have. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ethan. That was a great overview of the NADCAP program. A lot of information there, a great history. If anyone has questions for Ethan, feel free to reach out to him directly. His email address is here, or send me an email later on and I will connect you with Ethan. Our next speaker is Tim Davison with SAE International's corporate sales team to talk about the SAE Mobilis platform and the new SAE OnQ digital standard system. So Tim, welcome.
Okay, can you hear me okay, Beck?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Hey, another great session here again. These are great events that you guys have set up along with the High Alliance there. So, hey, yeah, I am Tim Davison. I'm on the corporate side here of sales, and where I fit into this puzzle is where basically I'm providing SAE standards and purchasing them in digital format. Beck, if you want to turn the page there. Okay, and we do that two ways. One way is SAE Mobilis. This is our web platform. This is actually a free search platform that you can go out to, SAE Mobilis, and you can search for everything that you need. And when it relates to SAE, whether it is standards, technical papers, ebooks, magazines, anything that we have as a publication, you can go out here and search. If you want to view the actual content, the PDF document, that's where our web subscriptions come into play. That's more, you can purchase the full access, or you can purchase just more like a small package where you can maybe download 10 to 50 standards per year on an Aero Pack. Since we're focusing more on the quality side, we do have a web subscription that is focused on aerospace quality standards as well as counterfeit. This collection has about 114 standards. It's a 1-year subscription and includes daily updates, so you always have access to the most current information. So if you have any interest in that, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to get you some pricing for that. We do single user applications, or we do full corporate solutions as well. The other thing that if you want to turn the page there, Becky, and do one more. See, do you have I think you have one for OnQ, right? Yeah, okay, SAE OnQ. This is a new platform that we're working on. We've been working on this for about 18 months now. SAE is digitizing our standard, gone out, and what we're doing is basically extracting what you would typically see in a PDF document into a database where the content is at the tip of your fingers. The type of content you're looking at is chemical compositions, the properties, and the requirements. This is saving time where you have to go through the actual standard and try the information out. We're doing that work for you. 2 different ways we're doing this. One is the SAE OnQ platform, or for some of the larger companies that may want to try to integrate this into like a DOORS program or something like that, we have the API where we can into your PLM system. We can talk to type of information. You know, we're SAE, one of the first DOs that's really approaching this concept with the digital transformation of standards. So, and the AS9100, that is one standard that we're working with one company right now to kind of integrate it into their system. So it's something, if you're interested in looking at AS9100, we will be more than happy to work with you on that as well. OnQ right now has our focus is on AMS standards with a small sliver of the E25 on the aerospace standards that relates to the fasteners and the nuts and the bolts. But I think that's it for me, Beck. So SAE, there's a lot of content to cover in a fast time. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to help you out with SAE Mobilis or the OnQ platform. Thank you, Becky.
Thanks, Tim. That was a great overview of both of those platforms. And again, anyone with questions, Tim's contact details are here, his email address, or feel free to enter a question in the chat box. So next, we're going to cover SAE's Aerospace Quality Training. Just a quick update here. We do have SAE AS9100D online training available, and that's designed for individuals involved with quality management systems, implementation, and auditing. The training helps navigate through the AS9100D standard and its appendices. So if you're interested in that, we will be distributing this presentation after the session to everyone that registered. So you'll have all of these links available to click on and go find all of the resources addressed today. We also have a link here for the AS13100 Supplemental Quality Management System Requirements Training. And there are a couple of different levels here. We have the Executive Overview video series, which is a free video series. You can just click the link and go and watch the videos online. It gives you a great overview of the entire training program. We have a level 2 program that is the AS13100 requirements on-demand training. So again, it's an on-demand online course. You can complete it at your own convenience. And then coming soon here is the Quality Foundations training. It's actually going through a pilot program this week, but registration is open starting in January, and it will be a virtual instructor-led training course. So a lot of different options here. We do have a level 4 also addressing some specific areas, but if you're interested in any of those, again, use the links or feel free to reach out to us directly. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to get involved with SAE's Aerospace Standards program. So we talked a lot about standards today and all of the different committees and everything. SAE's Aerospace program has over 200 committees, subcommittees, work groups, task groups, writing teams. this complex, colorful chart here shows all of those at a very high level. It doesn't show all of the subgroups and bodies underneath each of those committees. But if you're interested in that, there's a link to the chart that's on our website, and you can actually blow it up and read it. So feel free to try that out. But there are a lot of benefits to participating in SAE's Aerospace Standards Program and its various committees. And that's, number one is being able to influence the global aerospace market by contributing to the SAE Standards Development Program, networking with customers, partners, peers, suppliers, regulators that participate on all of those different committees. It's a vast network that is available to you through that process. Gaining an overview of the industry, a larger industry overview, a global aerospace industry overview, learning about state-of-the-art technology, but also staying informed of the technical standardization landscape and its progress. We saw a lot of that today with potential changes coming down the road to AS9100. That's just one standard. So getting involved, you can get access to that information easier and have a voice in that process. So this is our standards development process at SAE. When it comes to a new standard, the need is identified generally by the industry or the users. We form a committee to do the standards development. It goes through an oversight process, a balloting process, and then it's published and pushed out to the marketplace. So it's a very direct, straightforward process. It does take on average about 18 months from start to finish. A lot of standards are completed in a shorter period of time, and a lot take a little bit longer. So it depends. Some standards are a few pages long. Some standards can be 100 pages long or more in some cases. So, but a great process. This is a process for getting involved. If you're interested, the standards process is open to anyone that's interested with subject matter expertise in a specific area. So we welcome your involvement and your participation. We're talking about, I didn't update this, I apologize, but we're talking about quality committees today. So we have the G14 committee and the G22 committee, but also related is the counterfeit committees, G19, G21. They develop counterfeit electronic parts committee standards, material committee standards. But if you're interested in any of the SAE standards committees and programs, our point of contact there is Carrie Rohal, and her email address is here, carrie.rohal@sae.org. She can give you additional information to get you involved in a specific committee if you're interested, or feel free to reach out to me directly and I can make those connections for you too. So we have a little bit of time left to do some more Q&A and wrap up here. So if anyone has questions, I'll give you a minute or so to enter those into the chat box, and we can take care of those questions now. Or if you have questions after the webinar ends and you want to reach out, I will give you my contact details again at the end of this webinar here. So I don't see anything in the chat box at the moment. So we're going to go ahead with the wrap up today. Just to repeat myself a little bit, we will provide all of today's presentations to everyone that registered today. We will also provide a survey link to get some of your feedback to find out your thoughts about today's webinar, as well as maybe any other subjects that you might like to hear about from us. And then we did record today's webinar, so I will provide that link to you also when that video recording is available. It usually takes a couple of days. And if you want to connect with either the Ohio Aerospace Institute or SAE International, our contact details are here. Our websites are listed, as well as our LinkedIn sites. So feel free to reach out to us directly. And that brings us to the end of today's program. So the Ohio Aerospace Institute and SAE International thank everyone for participating in today's Aerospace Quality Standards webinar. And we hope you all have a good day. So thank you.